Have you ever been at a party, looked around, and thought, I need to get out of here, even though nothing bad had happened? Or maybe you've spent your whole life bouncing between two completely different labels. Some people think you're too quiet. Others think you're too intense. Somehow, both descriptions follow you around, and neither one really feels right. If any of that sounds familiar, stick with me. Because what I'm about to share isn't another personality label or internet stereotype. It might simply explain why you've always experienced certain situations differently than the people around you. There are 6 signs we're going to look at, and if you find yourself relating to 3 or 4 of them, it doesn't necessarily mean you're unusual. It may just mean your mind pays attention to different things than most people do. That's not better. It's not worse. It's just different. The tricky part is that we all assume our own way of thinking is normal. How could we not? We've spent our entire lives inside one mind, our own, until something makes us realize other people don't experience the world quite the same way. So stay with me until the end, because the 6th sign is the one people almost never talk about. And for a lot of people, it's the moment everything finally starts to make sense. Sign 1. You enjoy people, but you still need to get away from them. People are quick to put a label on this. If you leave early, you're shy. If you keep to yourself, you're antisocial. But neither explanation really tells the whole story. The truth is, you probably enjoy being around people more than others realize. You can laugh, carry a conversation, spend hours with friends, have a genuinely good time. Then, almost without warning, something shifts. Nothing happened. Nobody offended you. The mood didn't change. You just reach a point where your mind quietly says, asterisk, all right, I think I've had enough for today. Asterisk. It's hard to explain. It's less like getting bored, and more like running out of mental bandwidth. For the last few hours, your attention has been focused on everyone else. Following conversations, reading the room, keeping up with what's happening around you. That takes more energy than most people realize. Then you finally get home. You close the door. Everything gets quiet. And almost immediately, your mind comes back to life. You remember the point you wanted to make an hour ago. An idea you've been circling suddenly becomes clear. A problem that felt messy earlier somehow starts making sense. It's almost like your brain was waiting for the noise to disappear before it could finally think without interruption. That's why being alone doesn't necessarily feel lonely. For you, solitude isn't an escape from people. It's where your mind finally gets enough space to breathe. And if you've ever wondered why a peaceful evening by yourself leaves you feeling more recharged than a room full of people, that might be the reason. Your best thinking doesn't usually happen in the crowd. It happens after you've stepped away from it. Sign 2. You rarely stop at the first answer. For most people, once a question gets answered, the conversation moves on. For you, that's usually where the real thinking starts. Someone explains what happened, and almost immediately your mind starts asking something else. Yeah. But why? What led to that? Is that always true? Or are we missing something? You don't ask those questions to challenge people. And you're not trying to make yourself sound smarter than everyone else. Your brain just isn't very interested in stopping at the surface. You like knowing how things work. You like seeing the connection between ideas. And once something catches your attention, it's surprisingly hard to let it go until it makes sense. That can make everyday conversations a little awkward. Someone gives a quick answer, ready to move on, and you're still trying to understand the part nobody else seems curious about. You've probably had people laugh and say, "You're thinking way too hard about this." Maybe you smiled and let it go. But inside, you weren't trying to overthink anything. You were just looking for an answer that actually felt complete. That's a big difference. Some people are satisfied once they know the headline. You naturally want the story behind it. Sometimes that slows you down. Sometimes it means you spend more time thinking than everyone else. But it's also one of the reasons you notice patterns, connections, and inconsistencies that other people miss without even realizing they missed them. Sign 3. People think you're lazy when you're really just careful about your energy. This one gets misunderstood all the time. At some point, someone has probably called you lazy. Maybe they said you lacked motivation. Maybe they wondered why everyone else seemed ready to start while you were still sitting there thinking. From the outside, probably did look that way. But what they couldn't see was everything happening inside your head. You don't like giving your time away just because everyone else expects you to. Before you commit to something, your mind quietly starts asking a few questions. Asterisk, does this actually matter? Asterisk, asterisk, is this worth the energy it's going to take? Asterisk, asterisk, do I even care about the outcome? Asterisk. That process happens so quickly and so privately that nobody else notices it. All they see is hesitation. What they don't see is that you're deciding whether something deserves your attention in the first place. And once you've made that decision, you're a completely different person. You can disappear into a project for hours. You lose track of time. People suddenly wonder where all that focus came from. It was always there. You were just waiting for something that felt worth it. Sign 5. You follow your curiosity more than the crowd. Have you ever noticed how quickly people move from one trend to the next? One week, everyone is talking about the same show. The next week, it's a different app, a different opinion, a different obsession. And somehow, you never really felt the urge to keep up. Not because you're trying to be different. You just don't see popularity as a good enough reason to care about something. If a topic genuinely grabs your attention, you'll happily spend hours learning everything you can about it. You'll open one article, then another, then somehow it's midnight, and you've gone down a rabbit hole you never planned on entering. Meanwhile, everyone else has already moved on to something new. That's never bothered you very much. Curiosity has always been a stronger motivation than popularity. Maybe it's an unusual hobby, a niche subject, a book you've read 3 times because you keep noticing things you missed before. Whatever it is, your interests tend to come from genuine fascination, not from whatever happens to be getting the most attention that week. That's probably why small talk can feel a little unsatisfying. You'd rather spend 20 minutes exploring one interesting idea than bounce between half a dozen conversations that don't really go anywhere. If you've made it this far, chances are you're exactly the kind of person this channel was built for. Every video here is about understanding the patterns behind human behavior, especially the ones that rarely get explained in a way that actually makes sense. If that sounds like something you'd enjoy, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Sign 6. Your first instinct is to watch before you react. Here's one that doesn't get talked about very often. Picture this. Someone says something that catches everyone off guard. A conversation suddenly gets tense. A friend makes a comment that feels a little sharper than it needed to be. Most people react almost immediately. They interrupt, defend themselves, raise their voice, or say the first thing that comes to mind. You usually don't. There's a brief pause. Sometimes it's only a second. But during that second, your mind is already working. You're listening to how something was said, not just what was said. You're paying attention to everyone's reactions. You're trying to figure out what's actually happening before deciding how you want to respond. From the outside, that pause can be easy to misread. Some people assume you're quiet because you don't care. Others think you're hard to read, maybe even emotionally distant. But those assumptions usually miss what's really going on. You're not disconnected from the moment. If anything, you're more aware of it. You just don't feel the need to react before you've had a chance to understand it. Over time, that habit becomes a kind of self-control. Not because you never feel emotional, but because you've learned that your first reaction isn't always your best one. Ironically, that's one of the reasons people often describe you as calm, even on the days when your mind feels anything but calm. So, what does all of this actually mean? If you saw yourself in 3 or 4 of these signs, don't rush to turn them into a label. That's not the point. The point is understanding yourself a little better. Maybe you've spent years wondering why certain situations seem to affect you differently than they affect the people around you. Why socializing can leave you drained. Why you question things other people accept without a second thought. Why you're careful about where your time goes. Why you trust your instincts. Why you'd rather follow your curiosity than whatever everyone else happens to be talking about. Taken on their own, those things don't say very much. But together, they start to describe a particular way of moving through the world. Of course, that isn't always easy. Needing more time alone can be mistaken for being unfriendly. Thinking before acting can look like hesitation. Being selective can be mistaken for laziness. And staying composed in difficult moments can make people believe you aren't affected, even when you are. Those misunderstandings happen, probably more often than you'd like. But being different from the people around you isn't automatically a problem that needs fixing. Sometimes it's simply a different way of paying attention, a different way of making sense of the world. And whether that's true for you or not, it's worth understanding yourself well enough to know the difference. So now I'm curious, out of all 6 signs, which one felt the most familiar? Was there one that stood out immediately? Or did you find yourself relating to almost all of them? Let me know down in the comments. I genuinely love to hear which one you connected with the most.